1865, the end of the Civil War. The end of the war. The end had come. It was early spring in 1865, and General Robert E. Lee realized that the exhausted Confederate Army could do no more. Although Lee said that he would rather die 1,000 deaths than surrender, he now saw no choice. The South cause had been crushed. On April 9, Lee put on a fresh uniform. He rode wearily with his horse to meet U.S. General Ulysses S. Grant at their private home in the town of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. He arrived at the house and sat down to wait. Half an hour later, Grant made his appearance, clad in an old muddy uniform. The two generals engaged in friendly conversation. Then they got down to the business of ending the war. Slavery and the Union. In the decades leading up to the Civil War, the North and South were already divided. One important difference was slavery. The North was a region of growing industry and small farms, with large-scale agriculture playing a lesser part in the economy. Although slavery had existed in the North, all northern states had outlawed the practice by 1804. The South was a much different world. Its economy built on cotton. Southern plantation owners had chosen to use the labor of enslaved people to plant and harvest cotton. By the mid-1800s, nearly 4 million people from America were enslaved in southern states. They were forced to do many jobs, but most lived and worked on cotton plantations. At the same time, northern abolitionists were denouncing people bondage in the South. The Fugitive Slave Act in 1850 was a federal law that made a fugitive from one state a fugitive in every state. It required people in free states to return anyone who escaped slavery to their enslavers. Yet some Northerners helped people to escape slavery. Till the Civil War might never have happened if the United States had remained a small group of states in the eastern part of the continent. Instead, huge areas of land forcibly taken from native peoples to the west. These territories were becoming states, and Congress had to dedicate whether new states would allow slavery. The southern states wanted to keep a rough balance between the states and allow slavery, and free states. If free states outnumbered states where slavery were illegal, southern representatives would be outnumbered in Congress, since the representatives from free states would not share the interests of the South and will likely vote against southern representatives on various issues. That balance between states on the issue of slavery was maintained for several decades, but tensions between North and South were growing. The country reached a breaking point with the U.S. presidential election on November 1860. To the South's dismay, Abraham Lincoln, candidate of the anti-slavery Republican Party, was elected President of the United States. The southern states feared that the Republican-led government would destroy their economy and put an end to their practice of slavery. After their election, seven southern states South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas seceded from the Union. In February 1861, they officially formed the Confederate States of America, which they hoped would be a permanent nation separate from the United States. The war began just 2 months later in Charleston, South Carolina. On April 12, 1861, after a Union commander refused to surrender the Union fort, them. Confederate forces opened fire, forced to choose sides. For the southern states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee also ceded and joined the Confederacy. No one had any idea how terrible the war would be. Waging total war. In the first few years of the war, little went well for Union. President Lincoln's generals failed in one after another. Still, a Union victory in 1862 made it possible for Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted freedom to slaves in the Confederacy. When the war began, Lincoln's main goal had been to save the Union. How he began to think about how to end slavery once and for all. Although the North felt its cause was just Union losses were horrible in one battle, a Union survivor recalled that men fell like leaves in autumn. It seems miraculous that any of us escaped at all. The cries of a wounded, another man said there, were unearthly, terrible to hear and bear. As the war dragged on, Northern feeling against fighting grew. Like Republicans, Democrats called for an end of the battle and a negotiated end to the war. In 1864, election would determine the whole direction of the war, and Lincoln believed he would lose. Instead, Lincoln won. Re-election gave him the strength to continue the war in order to renew the country and end slavery. In January 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment in addition to the Constitution that ended slavery. The United States accepted as a punishment for crime. Lincoln also finally had the generals he needed. Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, those two commanders, were professional and effective. They sought to destroy the Confederacy and end the war as quickly as possible. Sherman's campaign took him through the Deep South. In late 1864, after burning much of Altana, his men marched across the state of Georgia. They tore up rail lines, destroyed bridges, and set fire to many houses. Meanwhile, to the north, Grant had been waging a grim and steady campaign against Lee. One horrible battle took place in the mid-1864s at Cold Harbor, Virginia. Grant ordered an attack on Confederate lines that caused some 7,000 Union casualties in 20 minutes. One Union soldier later said this wasn't war, but murder. Such bloodshed earned Grant the nickname the Butcher. Still, Grant was wearing down Lee's army. By the early 1865, he had Lee stopped in trenches outside Petersburg, Virginia. The South surrenders. Before dawn on April 3rd, Lee fled Petersburg. He knew that staying there any longer would doom his army, but Union forces doggedly pursued his retreat. Grant was determined that Lee would not escape. On April 6, Grant's army killed or wounded about 8,000 Confederate soldiers. Lee saw that surrender was the only responsible option. After 4 bloody years, the Civil War was coming to an end. Grant offered generous terms to South surrender. He allowed all Confederate soldiers to return home. He also agreed that Lee's troops could keep their horses and mules. Because Lee's men were nearly starving, Grant ordered food for thousands. Other Confederate forces in the South had not yet given up the fight, but they also surrendered. On April 2nd, Confederate President Jefferson Davis fled to the Confederate capital, Richmond. On May 10th, he was captured and would spend 2 years in prison. The Civil War was over. The killing of President Lincoln, the United States remained united, yet the North's joy over its victory in the war turned back to mourning. On April 14th, 1865, John Wilkes Booth gained entrance to Lincoln's private box at Fort Theodore in Washington, D.C. As the president and his wife, Mary, sat watching a play, Booth fired a single shot into Lincoln's head and then jumped onto the stage. The unconscious Lincoln was taken across the street to a private house. He died early the next morning. Booth was an actor who was fiercely opposed to both Lincoln and abolition. He was part of a group that sought revenge for the defeat of Confederacy. They planned to kill not only Lincoln but also Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward. As it turned out, only Lincoln was killed, though Seward received serious knife wounds. Union troops attacked Booth, another man, to a farm in Virginia. Booth was shot to death. Others in this group were later tried for their crimes. 4 men were found guilty and hanged. Lincoln's body was sent to funeral train back to his home state in Illinois. Although gone, Lincoln lived long enough to achieve his main goals, saving the Union and ending slavery. The legacy of the Civil War. The end of the Civil War also began the next chapter in the history of the United States. By December 6, 1865, the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, had been ratified by enough states to become law. Within the next 5 years, 2 more amendments in 14 and 15 were passed, giving formerly enslaved people civil rights and voting rights. Beyond ending slavery, the Civil War established the principle that the United States is an indivisible nation. States, whatever their feelings about their country, do not have the right to secede from the Union. In the years since the Civil War, the nations had seen other times of great strain. Americans continue to divide today on many issues and in many ways. Yet we remain one nation, the United States of America.